Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International here as we're moving on to the upper semis. Method EU versus 40K is going to be starting us out here. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk right now is Ironic, Nagura, and Sours here. We're moving on into these upper semis here, Sours, and going on to King's Rest, Tyrannical, Raging, Explosive here. We've seen this has really been Method EU's comfort zone for a dungeon that is so difficult and is so, avoided by so many teams on live servers.
Yeah, this is a pretty nasty dungeon, especially with Tyrannical and King's Rest. We saw a lot of players last week in King's Rest die to some of these bosses on an 18, and on a 19 they're that much more likely to die. Everything in here, like the third boss, takes an eternity to kill on Tyrannical, especially on a 19, and all the damage is so ridiculous. And the raging in this dungeon, that's no fun. The trash here is crazy too, and everything's dropping explosive orbs. This is a pretty nasty set of affixes that we've got here. I would say not only for that dungeon, but then following up with this one's Ironic, we get to go back to Shrine of the Storm again here. So even more threats, and I guess this is a fitting set of dungeons to have in that upper semis, because they really got to prove themselves that they deserve to be there.
Yeah, they pretty much have to deal with two of the worst dungeons we have all week. In addition to that, if they even get to the third match, they have to deal with Motherload too, which is also not a pushover. So this is a nasty series.
I think it's interesting how we were talking about, it's going to be 18s or 19s. We're having all the players at 415 eye level here, but then Nagura, we're just throwing out the nastiest affix combinations we can think of at them on these dungeons.
Yeah, it's actually really mean, especially serious, as Sarah said. Starting off with King's Rest, we've actually not seen it today yet, so gonna be interesting to see how they're doing on 19. But yeah, just the other affixes too, not just Tyrannical, having Explosive and Raging at the same time. This is going to be hard for those two teams.
Yeah, and also an interesting thing is, while we're looking at these compositions and we know that they're going to be that cookie cutter we're used to, mixing up some of the racials here, we are having a couple dwarves coming in for the side of the rogues. Being able to remove that bleed debuff, Sours, on the third boss is going to be really big for them, because as far as I'm aware, they're not going to be able to dodge through that because they're not going to have evasion when they're in Outlaw there. But starting it up with game 1 in the series here, King's Rest between Method EU and 40K.
All right, first time we get to see King's Rest this week.
Of course, 1 second, but the graphic was wrong a little bit, because we actually had Method EU versus 40K, of course.
Right. Yeah, on the team comps, right? You're right. It was Method EU versus 40K. We see the poll results 92% for Method EU. I think Twitch chat knows who they want to win here. I think I'm going to agree with him there. I think it's going to be 2 for Method EU. But we talked about these affixes. Raging, Explosive in this dungeon. We saw Raging last week in East, and they were able to deal with it pretty easily with the Soothe from the rest of the Druid. But Explosive as well on top of Raging is just mean.
Definitely, especially when if they want to do those big pulls again, as we saw last week, where they will pull the whole first room together, where their mobs are already very dangerous to pull together, but then on top of Raging and Explosive as well, we'll see if they maybe go a little bit less big and just do 2 packs instead of the whole room.
Yeah, we did see Method EU actually in the first Cup week on that 18 setting. They did pull the entire room, but I believe they said on Twitter afterwards that it was a quote accident. But they're doing the same pull. They're pulling everything this time with Bloodlust. Maybe they saw Team D pull it off there last week and they're like, you know what, we can do that too. There's a lot of things to look out for in here. These Witch Doctors are constantly casting Deathly Chill on the tank, and occasionally each of them will also cast Shadow Bolt Volley, which will do damage to everyone in the group, so they need to make sure that they're locking down their interrupts on those. At the same time, they have to make sure that they're soothing the champions, because they both enrage themselves as well as having the Raging affix from the dungeon, which will double their damage below 38% HP. So there's a lot going on here. That's why now is kiting all over the place.
Yeah, this is actually a crazy pull coming out of Method A, because Method EU, sorry. It is a 19, as you said, increased difficulty. You see everyone dropping really low, Raging and Explosive. We see now just trying to kite as much as possible, because those champions, they do have an own Raging effect, as we see one of them actually going bigger. And then on top of that, they will also have the Raging affix, so they will be double enraged. And of course, Sally can't dispel all of those, because all of them are Raging at the same time. So the tank just needs to kite once they drop low, and very well done by Method EU, proccing their first reaping here, while 40K chose to not pull all of the packs. They only pulled 3, and now managed to pull the last pack as well.
Right, and of course, as usual, they'll be pulling the whole Reaping Wave into the boss here just for that extra cleave damage, that little efficiency. Talking about the Golden Serpent here, the main mechanic of this fight is the golden debuff that he puts out on a player. It's a nasty magic debuff that does massive damage, especially in this Tyrannical affix. This is a huge healer check fight. And one of the things we've always mentioned about Xaylia is that he's always been able to focus on doing as much damage as possible while keeping his group alive. We can see him in that cat form doing DPS right now. So we'll have to see, the comparison between healers here. How good is Xaylia actually? How much damage can he do on this healing-intensive fight that he has to keep these debuffs alive?
Yeah, I think that Method EU has been a little bit lucky because I do believe 1 or even 2 of the first debuffs went on the rogues, so they did manage to cloak them away. And Xaylia was managed just to stay in cat form this whole time, doing damage to the Reaping and to the boss. The very first debuff we've seen go on Xaylia, he did manage to heal it away, of course. But yeah, dodging those debuffs completely and just making use of this cloak ability and just removing the whole debuff is very important.
And we do see Lazzle actually going down to the debuff on the side of 40k, and they don't have a battle res available for him, so they're either going to have to commit to killing this boss with only 2 DPS, or they're going to have to just completely wipe and restart it again. It looks like they're trying to do it with 2 DPS, but that's going to be a huge time loss for them.
I'm not sure if the Rastador is going to have enough mana to even heal this whole fight with 1 DPS death, because the boss is still very, very high HP. They don't have Bloodlust, they don't have a second Resto, and he's already in like 60% mana, so I believe this fight is just going to take way too long for Igloo to heal all those debuffs away.
And you can see how dangerous this fight is. Mira is dropping incredibly low there to just each tick of that golden debuff going down. Now, not only does the debuff do massive damage to players, but once it falls on the ground, it leaves a little golden patch on the ground. And occasionally the boss will call out to those patches and spawn these animated golds. These golds will kind of like fixate on the boss and move towards the boss. Now, should they happen to hit the boss will gain a massive shield and a buff, which makes the fight just pretty much impossible to finish. That's just in-game scenario. You aren't able to kill the boss at that point. So we'll see these globules kind of be punted away from the boss if they get too close, or they'll just be AoE'd down by someone in the group.
Yeah, so they used to have a lot more HP, those globules. They would actually scale differently. Then they got nerfed, so now you don't actually have to see them throughout the whole fight, which people used to do, like have their druids run mass root or something, or have mages just to see them throughout the whole fight. But since they nerfed the HP of them, they're actually pretty easy to kill. So all you have to do is make sure they're slowed or typhooned away, and once one of the damage dealers has some AoE ability ready, they'll just go back and kill them. So the rest of the root doesn't have to go mass root, which is not going to be very useful for the rest of the dungeon.
Right, and we can see the difference that having that 1 DPS dead for the entire fight is making for 40k. They are almost 40% behind Method EU on this boss here. In addition to that, Method EU still has their battle res available, so it's looking pretty good for Method EU right now, like we pretty much all of us expected, including Twitch chat out there. So, I mean, as we see Golden Serpent go down, we're going to see them move on to this Gauntlet Room, which is actually probably one of the more dangerous portions of the dungeon.
Definitely. The Gauntlet Room does have 4 different kind of trash packs that on live servers actually have a random spawn time. It might be any of them spawning first and then a random rotation. But here in the tournament realm, they are set rotations, of course, just to be more fair, so all the teams have an equal trash percentage. It will start with the top left and then go counterclockwise.
And of course, we can see that Xaylia is not with the squad right now. He's off pulling 2 of the animated guardians at the start of the dungeon, which is a pretty typical move we see teams make. As perfect observing there, we can see those guardians coming. Teams will typically do this because there is RP between each of these little boss events, where you don't really want to sit there just looking at them waiting for them to spawn. You always want to be doing something. You always want to be hitting something. So they pull those 2 guardians in, make sure they're dealing with something. This first event of the RP, this King Akul here, pretty much all he does is put nasty debuffs on players so they're easily dispelled, and then just kind of AoE everything down. When all of these agents are raging, it does get kind of dangerous, but they're dealing with it pretty easily.
Yeah, and Xaylia just dispelled the King, which was the one mob that just got marked with a skull on Method EU side. It is the highest HP mob from this group. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you focus the King, not because of there's no bolstering or anything, but of course you want to go on the highest HP mob and single target that one while AoEing to be as efficient as possible. And we also saw Xaylia saving the Soothe, the Enrage spell, just for this mob, as we see the Guardians just being cleaved down while also dealing with the rest of the trash here. And those Guardians, they're no joke, because once they drop low HP, they will gain an Enrage effect, just kind of getting haste, which is not dispellable by the rest of the druids.
And of course, the important part here is that they're both raging at the same time, so if you get hit by one of the suppression slams, you're probably going to get one shot. Now, this next pack, the most important mechanic to look out for this pack is definitely the Axe Barrage from the Guard Captain here. It will put a nasty physical debuff on all the players in the group, which does quite a bit of damage, especially when he's raging. However, we did see Xaylia knew that was coming and hit him with the Soothe instantly, removing that raging debuff from the mob.
Okay, so in 40k is that they are about to kill the boss, but Eagle is completely out of mana at this point, so they have to kill the boss fast before one of them dies. But I do believe they managed to do it. They are at this point very far behind though, because this boss fight just took them so long, with Lascelles being dead throughout this whole fight pretty much.
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, like even killing that boss with just 2 DPS is impressive in its own right.
Yeah.
We're not really exactly sure if it was gonna, if it's a damage increase to do that. They were at 80% when he died. They probably could have just wiped and went back. That might have been faster.
Maybe.
Who knows? But they're so far behind in the dungeon now just because of the choice they made. As we move on to the next portion of this RP, the King and the Queen here, I mean, the most dangerous thing for this triple melee comp has to be the Blade Storm from the King that pretty much they don't know when you don't know when the Blade Storm is coming. And we see Mira's actually going down. I believe that was, he stood in 2 of the swirlies from the Lost Soul.
No, he was mind control actually, because one of those mobs does cast a mind control on a random player. Now you can dispel the mind control, but only with offensive dispels. And usually, when you play Horde, you have Blood Elves who can use their Blood Elf Silence to remove that, or you have a Demon Hunter who can offensive dispel. But none of those, they all play Alliance, there are no Blood Elves, and they also don't have anyone else who can offensive dispel, so that's why Mira's died here.
Interesting. I mean, pretty unfortunate that it was in the mind control too. But they do get through it quickly. They just used their battle res on him there. Only, it wasn't that bad of a death, honestly. There really was no time wasted there.
Yeah.
It was just, 5 seconds on the clock plus the battle res timer. And they were waiting for these 2 mobs to spawn, so they didn't really lose too much damage out of it. Now, this is probably the easiest part of the event, the Queen and her Raptor. All she'll do is she'll throw these purple puddles on the ground, which will slow you pretty. I mean, the slow is pretty hefty. But the only dangerous part is if you're in the puddle and this Raptor jumps at you and starts slashing you. Other than that, there's not much there, and you can see they deal with it pretty easily.
Yes, they're done with the event now. They have 52% trash. They're on their way to the single construct that is standing on the bridge. We usually see teams shrouding past this mob because it's very inefficient to kill it by itself. The only time they might pull it is once they're done with all the blobs in the next room. They can pull this construct, like the healer can go back and pull the construct on top of the other 2 that are in the room. But again, this construct, is dangerous and not efficient to kill by itself.
And I think this is probably one of the rooms where we're going to see explosive be the most dangerous thing. Yeah. There's a lot of mobs here, and every single mob that you're in combat with has a chance to spawn one of these explosive orbs. I don't think we've really explained what the explosives do. They kind of keep to their namesake a little bit. Every mob has a chance to spawn an explosive orb when you're in combat, and it casts an explosion. Now, if you don't kill it before that explosion cast goes off, it explodes, dealing a large amount of % damage to everyone in the group. If 2 or 3 of these explosive goes off, it's going to be an instant team wipe. So they deal with this, it looks like they're dealing with this incredibly cleanly.
Yeah, very well job by Method U to deal with all these explosives. I do believe Zalia was helping a little bit as well. Residues are actually pretty decent at killing them in cat form. You can shred them, just killing with 2 globals or 1.5 globals. So well done by them to deal with them. I do believe the rogues are gonna be the ones who their main job is to kill the explosive, of course, because once they kill the explosive, they don't actually lose any damage because they can cleave off of the explosive with their Blade Flurry, which not a lot of other classes can do. If they switch to the explosive, they can kill them fast, but they're not going to do damage to the rest of the mobs at the same time. So Rogue's very efficient for that one.
It's one of the extra strengths bringing those Rogues to your group has. Now, looking at these constructs here, one of those instances of showing what the boss mechanic is by doing the trash before the boss, they'll entomb one of the players in one of these crypts around the area, and you'll have to click on the tomb to get them out. Now, the thing about these interment constructs, these trash before the boss, is they'll entomb a player on the side of the room that they're on. So we'll see teams pull both of the constructs on the same side so that they can very easily break each other out.
So I do believe Maris might have some issues with a disconnect because we just see him stand there in the back. I hope he can fix the issue soon and come back into the game. But Method U, of course, continuing to kill those constructs. They will proc the reaping once they kill those constructs. They have to decide if they want to just wait for him to be back. Okay, there we go. So they were waiting off on killing the construct until Maris was back into the game because, of course, proccing the reaping and pulling the boss with only 4 players would be not very good to do. So they were waiting for Maris, killed the mobs off, and now they're pulling the boss with reaping.
Yeah, there's a weird interaction with those mobs where if you pull them both to the same side of the room and they cast Entomb at the same time, sometimes they'll try to entomb the same 2 players in the exact same tomb. And if there's already a player in the tomb and it tries to entomb you in that tomb, you just kind of get stuck. So I think that's what happened to him, but fortunately they were able to kill the mob that had him entombed, so he was broken out just fine. They didn't lose too much time because the mobs are at like 5% HP. Moving on to the Embalmer, the second boss of the instance. This is definitely the main mechanic is definitely pretty much the exact same thing we saw from the trash, with the exception that he can choose any of the 4 crypts in the room, so you need to kind of be spread out to be ready to break a player out on any side of the room.
Yeah, so on top of that, you also see this fire underground, which spawns on players. You have to be careful with this fire because not only do you have to run away from it very fast, because the impact time is very quick. So if you finish your cast and you don't move out immediately, you do get hit by it, and it will do a lot of damage as well. Might even one-shot you at this point at 19 Tyrannical. And you also have to be careful where you place those fires, because some teams in the past actually place their fire so badly that they cut the room in two. And then it's very difficult to get the people out of the entombs, right?
And of course, the other mechanic that we haven't mentioned is the Drain Fluids cast, which will channel on a player, dealing quite a substantial amount of damage. And if they aren't healed, until they're healed above 90%, they are both slowed and deal reduced damage. So one of the kind of wombo combos we'll see on this fight is he'll cast Drain Fluids on a player, as we see going on Mirez right there, and then right afterwards, he'll cast this Burn Corruption, putting a Flame Patch right on that player. And if they aren't healed to full, and they don't have that, move speed debuff removed from them, they can't get out of the fire, and they instantly get one-shot.
Yeah, so one thing to note, Method EU actually did not use their Bloodlust here. They did have it ready once they pulled the boss with the Reaping. And if you think about it, it would be a good use of Bloodlust, right? You have the whole Reaping wave, you have the boss, a Tyrannical setting, it would be a good use. But they chose to save it, which probably means they might want to do a really big pull under bridge again, like they did the last time around.
Yeah, this second Bloodlust timing in this dungeon is definitely a questionable one. I believe we saw Team D use their Bloodlust at the end of the boss here on that 18 Tyrannical setting last week, and that was a timing thing because their Bloodlust would just come up for the final boss, King Dazar, 10 minutes later. I believe on this 19 setting, they're probably planning on having the third boss last quite a bit longer, so that they're more comfortable saving their Bloodlust for the trash pull, knowing that it will be up later for the final boss.
Yeah, I assume so. Now we have Method EU almost downing the boss here, while on the other side, 40k still dealing with the Reaping Wave that they just spawned, not even engaging the boss yet. So yeah, 40k pretty far behind at this point because of this one death that cost him so much time on the first boss, while Method EU is preparing for a pretty big pull here.
Right, I mean, we see them moving forward here to this very dangerous trash pack, instantly popping that Bloodlust. The mobs to look out for her, definitely the Spectral Berserker and the Hex Priest. The Hex Priest will hex players, making them unable to, do anything or help in the fight for about 8 seconds. In addition to that, the Berserkers will jump to an area and slash the closest player, applying a nasty physical bleed debuff to them. I believe it can be blocked or blocked so that the warrior tank can block it and not take damage. But if those bleed debuffs go off, they can stack, dealing a lot of damage. We haven't seen any of them go out just yet. They've been doing a good job of kiting the mobs around, but make no mistake, if a raging bleed debuff goes out, you're going to see these health bars drop quickly.
Yeah, they're actually doing a super good job at dodging them because they had 2 Berserkers. Now, usually what we see on live services, people will try to avoid pulling Berserkers at all if they can. And if they have to pull the Berserkers, they try to pull them one by one because they're just so dangerous, on top of all the other casters and all the other mobs that are in these trash packs. But Method EU just pulling 2 Berserkers on top of each other while having those casters up and not getting a single bleed debuff, so well done by them.
Now, this is an absolute gauntlet of trash. I mean, we already mentioned the Berserker as one of the most dangerous trash mobs in the dungeon, but the other important mob here is this Spectral Beastmaster. He has an ability called Poison Barrage, which will target one of the players in the group, and it'll do a frontal cone, putting a poison debuff at anyone hitting that frontal cone. We see that debuff getting dispelled off Mirez right there. So pretty much, if you get hit by that Poison Barrage, you want to make sure you're pointing it away from the group. And we only saw it go on one player both of the times it went off in this group, so these guys are handling this trash perfectly. In addition to that, the Berserker provides a huge area of denial, but once again, they just kind of knocked away the casts and made sure they had as high uptime as possible on the trash.
Yeah, so we see them dealing pretty well with this pack. One more thing to mention about the Beastmaster, that he also does a Daddy Shot. He will target a random player and channel a pretty long cast. If it goes through, he will do a lot of damage to the player and knock him back really far. So you need to be careful, especially on this bridge, that you're not standing close to the bridge or in the line of the bridge, because else you can just fall off and die. So we see the Reaping Wave actually being procced here from Method EU, 86% trash now, so dealing with the Reaping Wave and the trash pack at the same time.
In addition to that, I mean, in addition to all of this going off, there's this other, random Witch Doctor cast. They drop Healing Tide Totems, which will heal all the trash. There's just so many mechanics in this Gauntlet of trash to deal with. Seeing them deal with it this masterfully is incredibly strong from them. Now, they are already at 88% trash percentage. They only need to get to about 94 before having to deal with the final mini-boss in the dungeon. So seeing them do a relatively big pull here is a little bit questionable, but, I mean, knowing these guys, it's probably perfect trash percentage for them.
Yeah, most likely. One good thing about Shadow Melt to mention as well is you can see in the back here of Method EU, they actually paralyzed and blinded one of the mobs. So Berserker and one caster have been CC'd. Now, usually in live, if you're a hoarder, you don't have Shadow Meld to your whole group available. Then if you pull a pack, you need to kill the whole pack, or you need to wipe, right? You can't just get rid of some of the mobs. But with Shadow Meld, you can just CC them, kill the rest of the pack, then go past and Shadow Meld, pretty much losing combat with the rest of the pack, which means you can get perfect percentage pretty much, which is what Method EU is doing right now. They're going through, they're leaving this Berserker, that was the seat, and the Doctor back there. They're gonna Shadow Meld here, and now they have perfect percentage.
Like I mentioned, very impressive, knowledge and use of mob mechanics and CC to make sure they don't have to deal with any of the trash they don't need to deal with. Now, moving on to probably one of the most impressive, I think, dungeon bosses in the game right now. This honestly could be a raid boss in its own right.
Yeah.
The Council of King, I don't remember what the name of the boss is, the Council in King's Rest. Starting off with Cooler the Butcher, who's probably the most dangerous one of the bosses. The main ability you see going out of those whirling axes, they'll spawn under the boss, and then they'll swirl out in a counterclockwise pattern. But that's not really the dangerous affix on this boss.
I think the most difficult thing about Kula is the Severing Axe, which actually got dodged by one of the players. So once in a while, she will target a random player except the tank with a Severing Axe. If the debuff goes through, if it's not dodged or immune, and they dodged it again. Perfect play by Method EU. Well done dodging. But if you get hit and you're not dodging it, it applies a 20-second bleed debuff, which ticks for a lot of damage and for a very long duration. So it's very important for the healers to make sure that heal this debuff away if it goes through. And you also want to make sure to avoid the debuff in any way if you can, to dodge it or immune it somehow.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe they can immune it because they're playing Dwarf right now. I believe they can remove it with Dwarf. I could be wrong, but we see how difficult that debuff is on the Monk right there. The Monk can't remove it, so they just have to heal straight through that debuff, and you can see how hard it's ticking on him. Now, as Cooler the Butcher goes down, you'll notice the boss isn't dead yet. We have 2 more mini-bosses to deal with after that guy dies. So we're going to move on to the Totem Boss here. Zanzel the Wise. Now there's, it's sort of an interrupt boss. A lot of casts on it. You have the Lightning Bolt cast, which you can interrupt to just, mitigate a little bit of tank damage. And of course he has that Poison Nova cast. Every 24 seconds he'll cast that. If it does get off, it'll put a nasty poison debuff on everyone in the group, so you got to make sure you're interrupting that. But his main ability, the one that you have to deal with, is definitely his totem spawn.
Yeah, so there will be 4 totems that spawn around the room, as we can see right now on Method EU side. Now, one thing to note about the totems is also the affix interaction. They will actually spawn explosives. So with a full melee setup, this might actually get very dangerous, and that's why we saw Method EU actually splitting out on all of the totems. Usually you would want to go an explosive totem first, because the explosive totem is kind of the same as the explosive affix. It casts an ability, and if it goes through, it will do a huge amount of AoE to the whole group. So the number 1 priority should be the explosive totem. But because they're confident in having only 1 or 2 people going on that one and killing it in time, they make sure to play it safe, switch all the players on each totem to, just in case an explosive spawns on one of them, right, to make sure they deal with it.
Now, of course, we did mention all the mechanics of both of these bosses, but the kind of cool mechanic to this fight that makes it even more difficult than your normal dungeon bosses, when you deal with one of these 3 mini-bosses, you aren't done with them for the rest of the fight. They'll keep coming back throughout the encounter and occasionally casting one of their abilities. So we see Zula coming back, casting her whirling axes that you'll need to dodge for both of these bosses. In addition to that, Zanzel will come back and cast his Poison Nova in a random spot in the room. So you'll definitely have to have one of your rogues, grapple out and interrupt that Poison Nova so nobody gets the debuff. Now, the final boss here, Akali the Conqueror, it's kind of just a tank damage / stack-up boss, right?
Yeah, so the only thing really happening here is the barrel through, which will target a random member of the group, and then when the cast goes through, it will charge to that member. Depending on how many people it hit, it will do split damage and do less damage. Now, the reason why this barrel through is not getting casted all the way through is because it gets on the rogues and they're just vanishing it at the very last second to pretty much delay the ability and the boss not doing anything. Because it's a very, very long cast, as you can see, and if you vanish at the very last second, he will target another player and recast it. So the boss is pretty much standing still there, casting, because they just double vanish it. And
we can see there's Zanzel the Wise spawning on the other side of the room and the warrior leaping out to interrupt that. Now, not to mention, the explosives spawning on the totems, but those explosives can also spawn on the respawning bosses, which we did see happen with Zula when she spawned for the whirling axis. So this fight is definitely, there's a lot going on, and to see these guys masterfully deal with these affixes all at the same time, all of these bosses' mechanics going off, in addition to the explosive, is pretty impressive. Now, once again, we see this last barrel through going off, everyone's stacking up to split the damage from that barrel through, and then immediately afterwards we'll see the debilitating backhand, followed by probably some kiting out of now.
Yeah, so once this boss is down, they only need to kill a mini-boss. Of course, the last boss gives, I believe, 4 to 5% trash, so they don't need to kill anything else. The mini-boss cannot be avoided, so you need to kill him to access the last boss, meaning they also can't really avoid the Reaping, except with Shadow Melt, of course. Now we can see them using their Shroud here to reach the mini-boss, and the mini-boss is also very dangerous, if not the most dangerous mini-boss out of all dungeons.
Right. The biggest problem with this mini-boss versus, other mini-bosses is that all of his damage is shadow damage. And warrior tanks don't really have too much mitigation against shadow damage. They're more of a physical damage tank. So we're going to see now spamming out that Ignore Pain. We're going to see Xaylia pumping heals into him, right after he gets this initial damage off. Now, the Shadow of Zul is, his name is kind of explains him. He's a shadow of the raid boss Azul from the older raid rather. And we can see the mechanics going out. A pool that you need to soak if you're too close to it, as well as a debuff that goes on a player. We can see that orange swirl of fire around Miras here. He's going to run away from the group. It does fall off AoE damage. In addition to that, it'll just spawn one of these small shadow ads, which I'm assuming they're probably just going to CC so they don't have to deal with it. If that minion does reach its fixated target, it'll fear them for quite a long time.
Yeah, so it actually got rooted by Xaylia, but it broke. Now they're trying to CC it even more, and there we go, they killed it. Now, one thing to mention as well about the raging affix is that mini-bosses rage too. Now, thankfully, they do have the Raster Druid who does have Soothe and can dispel raging. So as soon as the mini-boss hit 30% HP, we saw Xaylia immediately using that Soothe ability. Now it's just running off, almost dies to that debuff, because it's actually a ticking debuff, damage over time effect that lasts even when the mini-boss dies. And we saw now just running off, almost dying, while Xaylia is trying to heal him, and he is line of sight. It's like, hey, come back, come back.
And of course, we're moving on to the final boss in the dungeon as they just skip the final Reaping Wave with Shadow Meld's King Nazar. Also a pretty impressive boss in his own right. Kind of a 4-phase boss with incredibly dangerous mechanics throughout the fight. First of which being this Quaking Leap. He'll target a player, jump to where they are, and he'll do fall-off damage based on where that player is. So if you never move, if you stand right where you are when he Quaking Leaps on you, you're probably going to die. You're probably going to get one shot. But the further away you run from where he jumps to, the less damage you'll take. So we'll see players running far out of the group in order to avoid as much of that fall-off damage as possible. Yeah,
we saw Myras just go out and teleport back in with his Monk teleport, so not taking a lot of damage at all. Now, there's 2 ads that spawn throughout this fight. We see Raban spawning here, which pretty much has the same abilities as the Raptors on the trash throughout this whole dungeon. They will jump on a player and do this frontal cleave. All you have to do is walk out of it, out of the hunting leap here, which we can see. Now, one thing to note as well is explosive, right? So if players stand too far away, Raban jumps to like 40 yards away from the group and spawns explosive there, then that might be a problem. That's why we see the players trying to be as close to the boss as possible so Raban doesn't jump too far off.
And we're about to enter the most dangerous part of the fight. At 60%, he spawns his second Raptor ad. Now, this Raptor isn't the same as the first Raptor. Zala will cast a terrifying Screech, an AoE fear that will fear everyone in the group. Now, on this affix, there's a chance that you can get feared and explosives can spawn during the fear. Now, when you're feared, you can't do anything. You can't attack anything. You're just running away. So if you get 2 explosive spawns during that fear, that's an instant group wipe. There's nothing you can do about it. That's just bad RNG. What can you do? But it looks like they're dealing with Tazala just fine. Tazala goes down, no problem. They do commit their Bloodlust to that portion of the fight because it is the most difficult portion of the fight. And we really only have 1 phase left at 40%.
Yeah, so one more thing to mention here is the Gale Slash. We can see those tornadoes going around the room. Those tornadoes, the boss will cast it on a random player. It will pretty much fixate the position of the player and then go around the room for the rest of the fight. Now, if you do get hit by those tornadoes, then you get a bleed debuff, which does quite a bit of damage, especially in Tyrannical. So you want to make sure to avoid them, especially because Xaylia probably won't let you die if you get hit by it, but he has to heal you and can't do damage instead, right? So that's why we see those players trying to avoid them as much as possible, so Xaylia can actually go in cat form and do damage as well.
Yeah, not to mention you won't be able to DBS, but it'll probably flame you a little bit as well. Final mechanic of the fight, starting at 40%, we saw these spears coming down from the ceiling, and they can spawn of 1 of 2 patterns. We can see that clockwise pattern around the room that always spawns in the exact same spot, hence their positioning. They're able to just kind of let them go past. And of course, the other is more of like a back and forth pattern where they'll spawn in like a spokes of a wheel pattern, and they'll go back and forth, and you just have to move back and forth as a group. And I mean, this fight is, you kind of see the same mechanics throughout the entire fight. Once you've dealt with the 2 birds, it's kind of just, can your tank beat the blade combos, and can you dodge these tornadoes that keep spawning throughout the entire fight? Because once again, they don't ever despawn in the encounter. So, it's kind of a race against time. The longer you're in the fight, the more tornadoes you have to dodge, but they're doing this fight perfectly.
Yeah, definitely. But as you mentioned, this fight takes a long time. So they have been on this boss a long time. And if you look at the final time, 26 minutes, I believe they played this dungeon very cleanly. They have only one death so far, had a pretty good strategy. But 26 minutes for this dungeon is just a very long time.
Very powerful performance here by Mythic EU, showing off that polish in King's Rest here, taking game 1 against 40K. And at this point, we're really trying to find out who can really hold a candle to Mythic EU in some of these dungeons, because it's not just about some of the strategies, it's also that execution, Sours, being so clean. And that at one point, you know, they hadn't even killed the mini-boss on the side of 40K, and then Mythic EU was just done.
Yeah, Mythic EU, the death on the first boss obviously didn't hurt. You see, the Rentari goes down, and then just a little bit after, Lozelle goes down. That the dot on this, on the Golden Serpent on a 19 Tyrannical hits so incredibly hard, and so 40K unfortunately lost so much time there. They were almost 2 full minutes slower to kill the first boss, and then a full 3 minutes behind on Machimba the Embalmer here. And then Mythic EU just kind of held that 3+ minute gap for the rest of the dungeon, and they were able to cleanly just pull it out there with, you know, that 3 minute gap is really, really hard to overcome, especially in King's Rest, if the other team doesn't make some sort of critical error.
Yeah, it's very telling to see how quickly they were able to generate a lead and continue kind of snowballing it. And Agrard really showed on that first boss, looking at the control of the group there. They always had some kind of defensive that they were putting on to people. They were cycling through cloaks to be able to immune any of the spit goals. You're seeing diffuse magic coming up, or fort brew or something like that, to be able to start mitigating a lot of that damage there. It just made Azalea's life so much easier.
Yeah, I think they definitely have very good communication when it comes to defensive usage, healing defensives that Azalea can use on them. So that's why we saw Azalea just being in cat form a lot on that boss and doing damage, even though, as we mentioned, it's a very difficult boss to heal. But the fact that they're using their defensive so well, Azalea can just, you know, stay in cat form, do damage, because he's sure that they're going to survive with those defensives.
It's always a healer's dream having DPS using good defensives here. But when we come back from this break, we'll see game 2 between Mythic EU and 40K on Shrine of the Storm. Don't go anywhere. Mythic EU up 1-0 over 40K here on King's Rest. And now we're moving on to Shrine. We've seen it twice already here, and all the teams that are playing in Shrine have just had some messy performances here, Sours. Do you think Mythic EU is going to be able to make the Sours clips of shame?
I don't want to jinx them, right? But
do it.
I would love to see them to make the walk of shame, because they played so well the whole tournament. If they made some sort of mistake here, I think they'd still be fine in the 3rd series, but they've been playing so well, even in Shrine. But the bursting necrotic, things can go wrong so easily. We've seen it happen time and time again today. They
haven't dropped a dungeon yet, and you think this might be the one that the greatest enemy of Mythic EU could be themselves in this one?
Certainly. I think the greatest enemy of these players here is going to be necrotic bursting.
Without a doubt, as we're going into that one. And we've seen so many times, Nicker, it's just been, you know, tank mitigation or just being able to dodge past that bridge. Always it's on the bridge leading to the second boss here. What is it about it that just causes teams to falter there?
I think this dungeon is just very difficult. I think there's just so many difficult parts about this dungeon, and on top of those difficult affixes too, right? There's just so many different things to deal with, and skips as well. We have been talking about Shadowmeld skips, but they're not that easy, right? If anything goes wrong with a skip, you just lose so much time, because you need to go back, you need to play the Reaping again, especially in Shrine. There's just so much time you can lose from one simple mistake or one small mistake, and I think that's the most difficult part about Shrine.
I think it's interesting comparing some of the Legion dungeons we've seen previously. It's ironic that we had a lot more open dungeons instead of things that were as focused and more linear here. In some cases, it kind of seems like we get a little all-in-y when it comes to these things, that if you're going to execute properly, assuming that your opponent does as well, and maybe that's the thing with Shrine, is that because it's so hard to execute properly, there's so many little things that can go wrong, it kind of just boils down to whoever you think is going to be able to avoid any mess-ups.
Right, and the thing to remember is, as a player, that you're kind of going through all these small things throughout the dungeon. You kind of have a mental checklist of things you have to mention. The person kind of leading the dungeon, making the callouts, can only say so much. So when you get to something like the bridge skip, they don't, you know, your leader's not going to tell you, okay, here's exactly what you have to do. Run through, sprint through, now pop your Shadow Meld down, move away from the bridge. They're just kind of going to say, okay, now we're going to skip the bridge. And as a player, sometimes you can just have these little mental missteps where you make a mistake.
Yeah, especially when you're in a competition format here. 40K needs this one to stay in the series and avoid it dropping down. It's Mythic EU versus 40K.
All right, so I do think Shrine is kind of like a really, really long Mythic boss encounter, where you always have to play really good, and if you do one tiny mistake, you're gonna have a disaster.
I mean, okay, stop you there. They're doing this insanely massive pull. Now, they are using a snap point inside this cauldron here. This is the biggest pull we've seen out of any team, and obviously they're committing their bloodlust to this, but this is so many caster mobs. This is almost every single mob in the start of the dungeon here. I'm not even sure how much percent this is, but, I mean, perfect execution there. Snapping everything to him instantly, and the second he's in any danger, just kiting away. Now, the thing to mention here is there are a lot of spiritualists in here, which are those caster mobs that cast Mending Rapids, which is a heal, which will heal anything around them, including themselves. I believe it's actually a single target, but that doesn't quite matter. There's a lot of them, and they have to interrupt those in order to deal with these mobs. You can see all these mobs sort of slowly moving up. This is just an incredibly dangerous pull, and seeing them actually pull this off is insane.
This actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Legion dungeons, where the tank would go in, do a huge pull, and then just like go away and kite, as we saw now, just standing at range, making sure he line of sights a little bit, making sure that he doesn't get hit by any of those mobs because of, necrotic and fortified. And as you said, those mobs are just very dangerous, but very, very good control coming in from Method EU, making sure they're interrupting most of those water blasts, which just do so much damage on this fortified setting here.
And of course, we see a little bit of a different pull pattern coming out from Method EU here. Now, I feel like we've had these difficult dungeons, especially in the first West Cup, where we saw teams kind of struggling through them a little bit, and then we saw Method EU do it, and we're like, oh, that's how you do that dungeon clean. They're really good. And, I mean, I'm interested to see if we're going to see the same thing from them, because both of the Shrine of the Storms we've had today have been kind of clown fiestas, to describe them in a way. Lots of deaths in both of them, so I'm interested to see if they can just pull off a clean zero-death dungeon here. Once again, dealing with the same mob types here, these spiritualists and these attendants. Once again, the heals on the spiritualists, as well as the water bolt cast from the attendants, just being extra tank damage. Being able to coordinate all of their melee interrupts on all these mobs is pretty hard to do.
Definitely, and we also see now here actually being Night Elf and not a Dwarf. We've seen, I believe it was Abracadabra earlier who did play this Dwarf just to make sure they have better management of the necrotic, but it cost them so much time because whenever there was a Shadow Melt skip, they needed to rest him back up. Well, now he is playing Night Elf, and he's not shying away from kiting. A lot of times we see prod warriors, just because they are so tanky, just standing in and doing damage, because of course the more damage you do, the faster it dies. But now it's not shying away from just kiting and just still doing those huge pulls. And we see them, of course, skipping the reaping here with the Shadow Melt and pulling some more mobs before they engage the boss fight.
Yeah, once again, skipping multiple things, right? The Living Current, in addition to the Reaping Wave, just stacking those kind of skips together to make themselves do even more damage. Now, one of the things you see here is this Necrotics debuff going out on Fragments right here. I think he pulled a little bit of aggro on those yellow mobs and took 15 instant stacks from that. It's kind of dangerous, but not unhealable. Now, the thing to mention about Necrotic, for every single stack of Necrotic have, you take 2% less healing, and healing done for yourself. So if you get to those high stacks, fucking 30, 40 stacks, you start taking less and less and less healing. So we'll see these warrior tanks tend to go up to about 30, 40 stacks and then just hop out and kite. So we saw that kind of out of Fragments there, but you're more willing to look at the Necrotic on the tank here.
Yeah, definitely have to be careful but on those boss fights, because a lot of times when you're in trash, as I said earlier, the prod warriors, they can just run away and kite. But on boss fights, you can't really kite the bosses, usually. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you reset your necrotic while there's abilities coming out, like this Undertow right now. Now, Undertow will be it will be a random target, a random member that gets hit by that ability. It will just do damage over time, and it will also knock you back. So all you have to do really is heal it away. And other than that, there's not that many dangerous abilities going on except this Surging Rush that we just saw, which he will target a random member, rush in the direction of the player, and pretty much knock anyone away in its path and do a lot of damage. Now, we've seen players fall up earlier, so I hope it doesn't happen this time around.
Yeah, I think we saw just about the tamest Surging Rush you could possibly choose. He shows a spot right next to him. It's like, I'm going to Surging Rush 2 feet away. And obviously they easily dodged that there. Of course, there's a little bit of a tell for that. He points his shoulder in a direction. It's kind of a hard one to read. So whenever you go into this intermission phase, when they spawn all three of these Aqualings that also copy all of the mechanics from the boss, you have to make sure you're dodging all three of these Surging Rushes at the same time. It's an incredibly difficult portion of the fight. Now, also, on top of that, each of these Aqualings will pulse AoE damage if you aren't tanking them in melee, which kind of makes this Necrotic affix kind of interesting, because they will melee 3 players in the group, and 3 players in the group have Necrotic right now. So what we'll typically see teams do is DPS one of them down quickly, but they didn't get them down there having 3 Surging Rushes going out at the same time, and perfectly, nobody falls off.
Yeah, so one trick you can do with the Surging Rush dodging, thank me later Twitch chat, is you can walk down those stairs or up the stairs, because those mobs will not Surging Rush out of the platform, right? So when you see the Surging Rush happening and you don't really know where to dodge, you can walk up the stairs or down the stairs on the right, and you will be perfectly safe.
Now, of course, dealing with all three of the Aqualings greatly hurts the main boss, so he respawns at about 10 to 15% health, depending on how low you got him before the phase, and he's pretty easy to finish off at that point. But after this point, we kind of enter this gauntlet part of the instance, where there's a bunch of mini bosses that we tend to skip, as well as large melee packs, and of course, the bridge skip.
Yeah, the bridge skip is very dangerous, as we've seen before. One thing to mention here is Mythic Dungeon, of course, skipping this mini-boss. The mini-bosses in general in this whole dungeon, not only are they pretty inefficient to kill because they have so much HP on fortified, but they're usually also very dangerous. So we see Mythic Dungeon, after killing the boss, just using that shroud, skipping the mini-boss, doing some pretty significant trash pull here. We've seen this pull before, but of course very dangerous with Necrotic, because there's just very little room to kite, and we see now just dropping so low.
Yeah, he's at 27 necrotic stacks, so he's taking about half effective healing here. But because he's completely out of melee range, he's not taking any increased damage. He just has that kind of insignificant dot from the necrotic stacks, so he should be just fine. And obviously instantly healed to full by Zalia. But interesting thing to note here is that they are very far ahead on trash count compared to 40k, and it looks like they're preparing to do a very aggressive skip here. They're going to hit this 40% Reaping Wave off of that Iron Hole Apprentice, and they're going to go for this bridge skip with Shadow Meld, skipping both the 40% Reaping Wave and everything on this bridge here if they pull it off perfectly. So we see now tanking everything in the back, the Ring of Peace coming out to keep all of the mobs behind them, and if they pull off the Shadow Meld perfectly, nothing should come to them. And they do it perfectly. That's a clinic on how to do that skip for all of those teams out there. Watch that clip. Clip that and watch it.
Yeah, that was a perfect Reaping plus trash skip coming in from FDU here. Very well done by them. A lot of teams earlier just didn't manage to quite do it, maybe not pressing the Shadow Melt at the right moment, having one player still being incumbent and so on. We've also seen one thing happened earlier where the initiates, they run away when they're low HP, right? And one of them just walked up the bridge and pulled the minibus back, wiping the whole group. So you definitely got to be watching out for those initiates, making sure when they're low HP that you still control them. Make sure you have a vortex or an AoE stun so they don't walk away and pull other trash mobs. But Mythic Dungeon still dealing with the trash very well. Once now gets high stacks, you just see all this control coming in for the whole group. You see the Ring of Peace come out, you see the Vortex, the Typhoon just helping out now to make sure he has time to reset the Necrotic, because it's just so dangerous.
Yeah, and not to add insult to injury to the other teams, but they also just did a bigger pull than every other team after the bridge here. They pulled, I believe, all three, both packs plus the patrol.
Yeah.
And most groups are pulling those up into two different pulls. Now, we do see them also doing another variation here where they're just skipping the patrol entirely and going straight to the boss without Bloodlust here. This is like, I haven't seen anything like this in this dungeon from any other team here.
I think this is very interesting because those initiates are actually very annoying with the affixes, right? Because bursting prevents you from pulling all of them together. That's what you usually want to do. The initiates, they don't have a lot of HP, they don't really do anything, they're just annoying. So what you want to do is you want to pull them all together and just AoE them down. Now with bursting though, you can't really do that, because if you kill them all and you have bursting, you're just gonna die because you have that many stacks. You can play it slowly and kill them one by one, wait until the bursting goes away, and then kill some more. But it just takes you so much time that Mythic Dungeon said, you know what, we're just going to skip them. It takes too much time to deal with them. We just go straight to the boss and just kill the initiates that are in the boss room, and that's it.
We see Tundi dropping incredibly low there. I'm interested. He might have taken a melee from one of the bosses there. He cheat deathed. And that was really... I
think it was the frontal.
Oh, probably took the frontal. That's unfortunate. Now, moving on to the second boss here. They've been on it for a while, and we kind of haven't talked about the mechanics. The main mechanic to look for here on Gale Collar Phase is slicing blast casts. Every single time you don't interrupt it, it will place a debuff on everyone in the group, and you can see they all have 5 of these stacks of this debuff, which means for every stack of that debuff, they take increased damage from the Slicing Blast. So letting that many stacks go through means they either have a whole bunch of faith in their healer, or they were missing kicks, which, I mean, I don't think a team like Mythic Dungeon would miss kicks unless they were just being lazy or their communication was messed up. But also to mention is as this fight moves on and on further, every single time you interrupt that Slicing Blast cast, it spawns a tornado in the room, which will sort of meander around the room and make it so that you don't really have that much room to run around. So once you've dealt with Gale Collar Fae, you really only have to deal with Brother Ironhole.
Yeah, maybe that is the reasoning for them to just let the cast go through, because we've seen them have 5 stacks and no one was really that close to dying, right? So maybe their strategy is just to play it a little bit safer, just let the cast go through, because you know, Sally can deal with it. He can heal the debuff away, or he can heal the initial damage away. But as you said, if you interrupt the cast every single time, you get a lot of tornadoes. And at some point, those tornadoes are just very difficult to dodge because of the zone on the ground that will speed up the tornadoes. And now with a full melee comp, if the whole room is full of tornadoes just going around the whole time, at some point it's just, you know, it's almost impossible to dodge. Or, you know, just one misstep and it almost one-shots you. So maybe that is the exact reason why they choose to just let some of them go through, not having those tornadoes to deal with.
And of course, they just ended up dealing with the second boss pretty easily there. That guy just kind of only does major tank damage, so they decided to pull more trash into it and cleave it down. Now, what's interesting is they have this Bloodlust available, and we've seen a lot of teams do this triple or, you know, even up to 4 or 5 Enforcer pull. And I'm wondering if they're just planning on using their Bloodlust for that pull because of how dangerous it is for the tank.
Yeah, we just see it now going in there. Yeah, okay, so they're pulling all those enforcers, which is an enormous amount of damage on the tank, especially on top of Necrotic and Fortified here as well on the 19. So this is a crazy pull coming in. Now has 50 stacks of Necrotic here, so he needs to start kiting at this point. We will have to see some CC helping him to kite here. We will have to see some Ring of Pieces coming out to deal with all of this, because if he gets hit by any of those enforcers, he will most likely die.
I mean, these guys, I have to assume at this point that they're just on a complete other level from other teams. Because usually we'll see teams kind of put off pulling the second boss until they have that second Bloodlust available. But these guys just knew they didn't need it, and then they decided to not use it on this 5 Enforcer pull. Which, make no mistake, this is an incredibly dangerous pull. Now it's just a god at kiting here. If he gets hit by any of these deep smashes here, he's gone. And we saw him also, like you mentioned, go up to 53 stacks, and no problem for them. They just kited it out, didn't die, no problem.
Yeah, and then you also have a Ritualist in this pack, which continues to cast an AoE Shadow Bolt ability that needs to be interrupted. So not only do they have to deal with the kiting and the CC, they also have to constantly interrupt this Ritualist. And there's these small mobs that apply a lot of, you know, all of those mobs that are dying are just applying Bursting, applying Necrotic. So very well done by them. Now they did proc their Reaping. They skipped the rest of the charge and Shadow Melted on the other side. Again, skipping 2 things at the same time with their Shadow Melt. Skipping the Reaping Wave and skipping the trash that they want to skip. So very well done by Method EU. Now they're using one of their shrouds to go past this bridge trash, which we've seen most of the teams in the past actually pull the bridge trash. So we'll probably see them doing that right here and killing some of the rest of the Reaping mobs that they didn't manage to Shadow Melt.
Yeah, no, we mentioned this before. You need about 80% mob count, you know, once you've killed the third boss, because in the final room of the dungeon, there's about 20% mob count left. So as long as you have 80% mob count when you kill that third boss, you're set. And we see a lot of these teams just kind of clear up that mob count on this bridge here. Now, this bridge trash is incredibly dangerous. You see a lot of these mechanics going out. The mental assault, that frontal sort of those black lines going out in front of the boss, you can see them there. If you get hit by that frontal, it stuns you for 5 seconds. And it also does a lot of damage. In addition to that, there's so many interrupts in this group. The Rip Minds, the Detect Thoughts. There's so many things that you don't want to let get off because they do a lot of damage to your group. And seeing them dealing with this once again perfectly, they have their interrupts set. They know what they're doing. No problem for this group.
Yeah, one thing to note as well is that there was this mental assault, the frontal, that if you get hit by, you get stunned by it, was actually casted on towards Saelia, 2 of them. And Saelia just had perfect trust into their group to interrupt this cast with a stun that he was not moving out of it. He was just standing there knowing that Maris is going to use, or Maris or now is going to use the AoE stun to interrupt it. So very good communication by them, as well as just, you know, having this perfect synergy, just trusting each other and playing so well together.
We did see some troubles on the side of 40K. They had a little bit of some deaths on their side, so they are even further behind now than they already were before. But I mean, Method EU right now is once again putting on a complete clinic. It looks like they just have a completely different strat than any other team in this tournament. It's completely different from what we've seen from any other team so far, and it just seems like it's so much better.
Yeah, especially because, you know, this looks kind of easy when you look at Method EU. They have 0 deaths, they're doing everything so cleanly, but we've seen other teams struggle so much in this dungeon because it is very difficult. Not only is Shrine a very difficult dungeon in itself, but it's also fortified, it's bursting, it's necrotic. There's some very, very difficult parts of this dungeon, and any sort of small mistake is just gonna cost you so much time. So just, you know, the way Method plays this, just heads up, they're just doing so well. Now they killed those tentacles off there. Only need 2% for their Reaping, which they will probably trigger after this Lord Stormsong here and the rest of the tentacles. But now, onto this boss.
Yeah, I mean, well, just to mention how far ahead they are, once again, they're pulling the third boss before 40k has even pulled the second boss. They're an entire reaping wave ahead of 40k, and they're already burning down Lord Stormsong very quickly. Now, of course, the main mechanic to Lord Stormsong are these purple balls that float around the room, these void balls, and the main mechanic for dealing with them, of course, is the Ancient Mindbender. We see he MCs a player of the group. We just saw Xaylia get MC'd there, and that MC'd player can run into these void balls, deal damage to themselves to break themselves out, and then once they're broken out, the room's clear again.
Yeah, you also see one thing to note here, that both Gingy and Pragnus are actually playing dwarfs and not night elves, because they have their own kind of shadow meld, right? As a rogue, you have the banish, so you don't need to be a night elf to do those skips. Now, dwarf is pretty good for some of those dungeons that they were playing, because you do saw King's Rest earlier, where they can just get rid of some of those bleed debuffs, and you can also get rid of necrotic, actually, which, usually you shouldn't have necrotic as a rogue, but if something happens, right, if they get aggro, you can still get rid of it this way.
And of course, we see the Ancient Mindbender also going out on Gingy there, unfortunately. Usually these guys will try to use their Cloak of Shadows and magic immunity to stop them from getting the Ancient Mindbender, but unfortunately he didn't have it up there, so he did get MC'd. He didn't get to do boss damage. A little bit slower boss kill, but with how far ahead these guys are, I don't think it really matters. That's just a minute. That's like a 10-second time loss for them. They are dealing with Lord Stormsong perfectly, which is also impressive because there are some other mechanics we didn't talk about. There's a two-man interrupt rotation on those Void Bolts. He also will randomly cast Rip Mind on random members of the group, which does a lot of single target damage, but no problem for the guys. I don't think anyone even got a low.
Yeah, so now they're gonna proc the Reaping on this Dweller pack here. Once they proc the Reaping, they're most likely going to Shadow Melt it, so they don't have to deal with the rest of the Reaping wave. And then they're gonna be on to the last boss room. The last boss room has the rest of the percentage that they need. As we can see, the Shadow Melt plus the Vanish coming out from the rogues. Now, one thing to mention is that they are saving this Bloodlust this whole time. Now, this means they probably know that they're gonna be this fast, and they know they can only get one more Bloodlust. Now, I believe that the Bloodlust is gonna be most efficient for them if they actually can one-phase the boss, the last boss, which we will talk about later, but they're probably going to save the Bloodlust just for that moment.
Right, and of course we are entering the most dangerous portion of the dungeon, the river swim with all these jellyfish. If you get hit by the jellyfish stun, you get stunned for about 8 seconds, and you get added to Sour's fail compilation for MDI 2019. But fortunately, they all get past it no problem, and they're going to probably use one of their shrouds to make sure they get into the boss room without pulling any of these eels, because, they actually have that damage buff from the boss to deal with these eels later.
Yeah, so we're probably going to see a shroud coming out here. We see some teams actually just dealing with 1 or 2 eel packs before they pull a boss, which we're probably going to see from Method EU here as well. Some people just choose to skip all the eels and do them during the boss fight. Some teams just choose to do 2 of them beforehand. It might be, the choice is maybe they have cooldown on some of their big offensive cooldowns still, so they just want to get rid of some of the trash before they pull the boss. But you can see those eels are actually very dangerous, because not only do the eels themselves have an ability that applies a bleed shadow stacking debuff on the tank, but you also of course have necrotic. So there's 2 debuffs that stacking up that do taking damage, and necrotic also reduces the healing taken. So those eels are actually very, very dangerous with those affixes.
Right, and moving on to Volzith the Whisperer. This is kind of one of those interesting portions of the dungeon where where groups will tend to do something a little weird. Instead of pulling trash before or after the boss, they'll tend to pull the trash with the boss, and that has to do with this healer with debuff that we see going on Xaylia right now. That's a stacking debuff that increases the healer's damage and healing by 10% per stack. But in addition to that, it also reduces their HP by 10% per stack. So when they're at 9 stacks, they're doing 90% increased damage, 90% increased healing, but they only have 10% of their normal health.
Yeah, so this debuff, they can just spell the debuff off of themselves in case they're in danger, because any ability that goes on them will probably kill them, because they have so little HP. So, but what we see those healers do is keep the debuff on them, of course, to increase their damage, to increase their, kill time of the boss. But they obviously need to try to avoid anything that can possibly damage them. Now we see the Intermission Phase coming out here, where the healer plus the tank will get sent into one realm, while the 3 DPS get sent into another realm. Now you do have different things to handle in those realms, but it shouldn't really be a problem for them, especially because they have triple melee, which have a very short interrupt timer.
And it's deja vu all over again, dealing with the exact 3 same mobs that they dealt with in the intermission realm. 2 caster mobs that need to be interrupted so they don't take any AoE damage, as well as the tank mob, the Sunken Denizen, that just needs to be pretty much face tanked. And it can be cutted around if need be, but generally not too difficult. The really important thing you're looking out for is the consume essence. Now we can see the effect of that 90% damage buff on Xaylia there. He's doing more damage than pretty much everyone else, except for Genji, who probably maybe rolled a 5 buff or something to do that much damage. But you can see the power of that 90% damage. As we see them re-engage with Volzith, they're going to interrupt the boss here very soon and pop that Bloodlust to try and one-phase this boss.
Yeah, so we saw some one-phases coming out of the plus 18 dungeons last time around, but now we have one higher level, meaning you need more damage to actually one-phase this boss. And even last week, some teams didn't manage to get the damage to one-phase this boss. So now we're going to see everyone trying to do as much damage as possible, is saving the Bloodlust for this exact moment just to not get another intermission phase, because those intermission phases, they just take so long. Even if, you know, they're not going to wipe it, it just takes away so much time because you get sent in another realm, the boss can't be damaged, it just takes away a lot of time from your group. That's why you see them popping their Bloodlust, just using all of their cooldowns here.
And of course, in the first phase, they have to deal with these manifestations of the deep, make sure they don't get to the boss. Otherwise, they'll explode for AoE damage and add mana to the boss, which, whenever he gets to 100 mana, he enters that intermission phase. But once again, dealt with perfectly. Boss goes down. All they have left to do is deal with these eel packs, and we have a perfect Shrine of the Storm that we've seen so many teams today already have huge problems with.
Unless now dies on these eels, because he actually died the last time too. It was after the timer though, so if he dies after the timer, then we're right. There we go, perfect Shrine by Method EU.
I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Of any of the dungeons, I was thinking, I'm like, this is gonna be the one that we're gonna get a death. We're gonna get some mistake here, but against all odds, Method EU putting on a clinic onto Shrine of the Storm here. And just shutting down 40k here, Sours. This is incredible.
Yeah, they just blasted this dungeon. There's not a lot you can really say to that. They were so ahead on kill count for the first boss. They did perfectly. Instead of watching a boss kill montage for our highlight reel, we're just going to go ahead and watch 40k's dungeon kind of fall apart. So they were fighting this trash over here, and we saw the similar mistakes happen earlier in the day, where all of a sudden, okay, it's bursting. You don't want to pull additional mobs. Oh no, they got some additional Tide Sage Initiates. Oh no, the patrol comes, and the patrol social aggro more initiates. Oh, there goes a feared initiate. He's running down the bridge, and we all know what happens when a feared initiate runs down the bridge. Unfortunately, he does pull the elemental, so this is too much bursting. This is a mini boss that you really just can't afford to kill at all. He's so awful, and then he kills the whole group. Poor 40k here. This was, you know, they were definitely behind at this point, but then there's no coming back from this.
I really thought 40k's European goalkeepers would have been a lot better than Leech Boys on that end, but unfortunate that it went through that. But I gotta say, Shrine of the Storm was one of those dungeons, Zagura, that we were just kind of convinced on it. And I think most telling was how they got past the initiates. So many teams just seemed to kind of sit there, pull them piecemeal, go through it, deal with the bursting. They shrouded right up there, and they took the, 12 stack? 8 stack almost immediately without a care in the world. Yeah,
just very smart, to be honest. Like, you don't ever think about skipping the initiates because, as I said, they don't have a lot of HP, they're not very dangerous to deal with, but because of this affix and because of those other dangerous things that we saw earlier with initiates walking away, pulling other mobs, it just, you know, they just figured we're gonna shroud past them, don't deal with this at all, and it worked out perfectly for them.
Yeah, really adapting to what the affixes are going to bring you. And as we're looking at the brackets, we're seeing Method EU, no surprise, sitting in that sweet spot in the upper finals here, awaiting the winner between Abra, Kedavra, and Method NA.